We're gonna have a conversation with somebody who is sort of the best kept secret of Dallas. He's making his way this way, so I'm going to introduce him while he's walking toward me. Well, thank you.
It's just a record for the
Is this
social media.
better?
That's better.
Oh, that's for recording? Mm-hmm. Should I turn it on?
Well done,
Thank you, sir. It's all alive. One of the things that was fun about this year with Deborah and Alex and Drew was talking about who we might get as a sort of special guest this year to converse about our very favorite topic, which is making theater in the United States of America in the early part of this century. It's never been more challenging, it's never been more exciting, it's never been more unbelievably necessary. So as we talked about potential people to chat with, several of us brought up the name Stan Wojewodski. If you don't know who this human is, he is on the theater faculty at SMU. He has, for a decade, he was the chair of the department. If you've ever chaired a department, you know nobody sane does that for more than about 2 years. So something's wrong with him in a great way. One of the most dedicated theater artists I know. So I don't embarrass him or get him mad at me, I will just say that starting in 1975, he was the grinning at how we fail and occasionally succeed. So would you help me in welcoming Stan Wojewodski? You have a seat at my table.
I want to have my back to this fellow.
We're gonna say open to everyone.
All right. Does this work? Is this awesome? Okay, great.
We're on a turntable, so they're gonna spin it slowly.
Oh my God.
One of the things that I think is very special in this town is that SMU has an unbelievably great theater department. It seems to be getting only better all the time. Certainly at Theater Center, and I'll speak for Alex and Drew, that SMU students, not only in acting, but in design and directing and a million other ways, keep feeding this phenomenal city with talent. And Stan, I'm not sure his undergrads, when he's teaching directing, know his breadth of experience, but so much embrace into it.
Not if I do it right. They don't.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So one of the things, this is truly just a conversation. You can chime in, but I'd like to get him started on a topic and let him go. And in a recent dinner, over a really great bottle of Pinot Noir, thank you for that.
You're very welcome.
We were just talking about the unbelievable challenge it is to make theater, specifically make theater at an organization where part of your responsibility is feeding personnel and keeping the thing moving. And you said something that has stuck with me, Stan, which is that imagination has to blossom and be present before you worry about raising money, before you get concerned with all the things that are inevitably frightening and worrisome.
Yeah.
And I would love to just kick that off and say, if you can remember what the two of us were talking about,
Yeah.
would you expand on that?
Yeah. Are we okay with this? Right there? Okay, great.
Hold it closer.
Hold it closer. But I'm going to pop my P's. All right.
It's going to be great.
I apologize in advance for my plosives. How's that? All right. It's not on? Drew?
Yeah.
It's not.
Switch out, Joel. Yours on.
I'm hot.
Oh, well, yeah.
Stop it.
I'll see.
Sorry.
Yeah. I think it's important to talk about imagination before you talk about money. It doesn't, by the way, mean that you don't ultimately talk about money, but I think the most important thing is for an organization to understand what it's about, what it's trying to do, and to try to avoid the mistake of fundraising at the box office. Patronage has always been a favorite topic of mine. I used to say to the board of directors with whom I worked that Shakespeare had Elizabeth, I would say, and Moliere had Louis, and we have you. Yours is a noble tradition, as noble as ours. Somebody else always paid for it. And as a result of that, we then would often have an easier time launching a 5-year plan. As you all know, the purpose of a 5-year plan is to have something that you can amend with regularity. But without it, you ain't got nowhere to go. Nothing to look at. The first time I had to make a 5-year plan, I had just become an artistic director. I was too young. Well, yes, and certainly in the ways of management. So happily, I had a seasoned managing director who said to me, "We're going to talk about the 5-year plan, and let's do that tomorrow, and we'll do it in about an hour and a half." So I said, "Sure," I went in and I said, "You know, I was an English major with minors in philosophy and education, and then I went to drama school." And he said, "All right, here's how it's going to go. How might last week have gone better?" And he told me subsequently that after an hour and a half, he said to me, "That's 10 years. We only want to talk about 5. And I think sometimes artists are daunted by the possibility of this sort of planning and empowerment and what it means, and I don't have an MBA, and really if you just talk about how it might have gone better with more dignity and a greater guarantee of civility, and by dignity I mean economic dignity as well for the people involved, then you can jump off and go to that place. I think, based on my experience of this organization and its leadership, that you are at an extraordinarily lucky moment, it would seem to me. I'm somewhat on the outside, although I have lots of esteemed colleagues at the heart of it. You're at a very lucky moment, but also this is a very dangerous moment, I believe, for second thought. And I think it's dangerous because, I'll just air my prejudices, or at least my major one, and that is that organizations die on the vine, artistic organizations die on the vine, in my experience, because 2 things happen. They get to the moment, something like this perhaps, I don't know enough about the details, and at this moment, the theater is in danger of ignoring its old, or its mature, its accomplished, and killing its young. And why I think this is an extraordinarily lucky moment is because I think you can avoid that if you do a couple of things that are very difficult, but extraordinarily rewarding. And those things are sitting down and honestly facing whether or not the organization is undercapitalized artistically. And that's what I mean by imagination. Are you counting on too few people to do too many things too often? Those people are often on the younger end of things. Those people are often on the younger end of things, and those are the people that you're in danger of killing. Or do you not then look to the second question, which is, are we undercapitalized financially? And that's when you're in danger of ignoring the very people who have the most to contribute for the most modest fees, the most modest kind of attention that will revitalize the organization, will carry it forward. I think that there's a lot of theater going on in Dallas, and I think a lot of it is just terrific, and you have a wonderfully dedicated cadre of artists and artisans and managers. However, the bad news is, and I say this, I hope I'm flattering the people about whom I'm speaking when I say this, because I intend to. A lot of it takes place between 6 o'clock in the evening and 10 o'clock in the evening, because the people who are doing it at the highest level can't afford not to have a job. Every civilization is ultimately measured by the quality of the questions that it's willing to ask itself. And oftentimes in response to, oftentimes in enslavement to a management model that people are unwilling to dismantle at regular intervals in order to take full account of artistic impulse and then rebuild in the service of liberating that impulse in order to deliver it to the community out of which it arose, you see where I'm going. I predict that unless boards of directors and people who care, patrons, a beautiful word, I think, trustees, gorgeous word, philanthropists, right in there, unless that group of individuals, in concert with, in communion with the artists, ultimately I would say actually as part of a conspiracy, as part of subversive activity. Subversive because you have the sacred trust of delivering to the organization resources that ordinarily do not come to it in a late capitalist culture. Not going to happen. A conspiracy in the root sense of that word. You know, any director, any theater artist really will tell you that you can wander into the back of a theater, whether you directed the play or not, or the corner or wherever you might not even know the play, but certainly if you've directed it or worked on it, you can tell whether or not it's working. You could go in blindfolded and you could tell whether or not it was working. And the reason you can tell is the audience and the actors are breathing together. It's a conspiracy. From the Latin, breathing together, conspiro. What makes the conspiro part of it possible is the inspiro part, the inspiration of the artists. Artists are not different. They're members of the community. There are the people, my favorite definition is John Leonard, who's no longer with us, the great critic John Leonard, called artists stormbirds on the fault lines of the multiculture. I've never heard a better definition of who artists are. They hear it earlier, oftentimes. They don't necessarily know what to do about it, but they can shout the question in the most provocative, enticing, magnetizing sort of way. And that's what makes them necessary in the community. You know, I'm really sad about what's happening in Poland. I'm half Polish. My mother was Irish, my father was Polish. Made for some very interesting dinner conversation, needless to say. My mother would say she had heard a Polish joke. My father would say, I heard that same joke today a different way. My characters were named Pat and Mike. They were not Stashu and Yashu. But what happens, I think, is that if you take that sort of thing into account early enough, and it's plenty early, that's the good news, it's plenty early, and you really commit yourself to doing something about it, you're in really great shape. I want to talk a little bit, and then questions or whatever, about this fundraising at the box office stuff. You know, I grew up in the regional theater movement. It's obsolete. It's obsolete. It failed to deliver what it said it would deliver. The corporations failed to deliver what they said they would deliver if we did a really good job, and we did a really good job. The foundations failed to deliver what they said they would deliver if we did a good job, and we did one hell of a job. So the management model never kind of worked. And so what happened in many places was fundraising started to happen at the box office. And what that meant was that theater organizations would say, we do 6 plays, and we play annually to 600,000 members of our community. That's baloney. Usually you're playing to, I'm going to rough this out in even numbers, you're playing to usually 25,000 white heterosexual couples from 3 zip codes and their friends if they could talk them into coming. 6 times. And the reason that those 3 zip codes became important is that's where you could peddle your wares. That's where you could take it uptown, if you know what I mean. And what happened is the balance turns around completely, and suddenly you're depending on people coming to the theater. I think lots of people should come to the theater. I think lots of people want to come to the theater. And I think people will come to, if you free yourself of the box office, by which I don't mean make the theater free at all. But if you free yourself, probably you're on the verge of discovering the truest possible audience you can for the mission that you have stated, and it's going to be larger than the audience you have now. I know that's true. Every time that's been attempted, and it's difficult to talk people into doing it, it's worked. Every single time. Every single time it's worked. So anyway, congratulations.
I'm piggyback on that. Now you know why we asked him here. Because I think, Sam, sometimes whether we sort of have moved to the point that we recognize whether something is obsolete or broken, it's a little hard to admit it.
No, I'm saying I'm not talking about individual theaters. I mean,
Sure,
the
the
model is
right.
obsolete. It is not the model to which I think a company as dynamic and important with the potential that this company has, I don't think you should aspire to that model. Make your own model.
Then I want to spin on top of that, which is that speaking of 21st century and late capitalist economy, we are caught in this place of also talking about equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Yeah.
Which sadly is becoming a little bit of like EDI, just sort of gets bandied about. But this amazing city with an extraordinary history, still young. I think of Dallas as sort of a 13-year-old boy that's gone berserk, and his parents have to chase it down and calm it down, but that is really exciting. It has an incredible race history, it has an incredible class history, regardless of what you think about that. What I love getting you started on is where the thing you've just been talking about intersects with equity and inclusion. Because I think we want to reduce EDI to sort of ideas about ethnicity, when in fact what we're trying to do is get barriers out of the way so that every human being in a democracy can come be a part of what we are doing, which is speaking to the human condition. And the very thing that you were just chatting about wraps into that in terms of getting the barriers out of the way. So
yeah. Well, I think that there's a lot. I think that I have to tell you, when Joel called me and then I met with Alex, I told them both the same thing. Don't you want Patty LuPone? Maybe I can get you Harry Connick Jr.'s number. Isn't this supposed to be a gala? Anyway. I also reminded that Pablo Casals, when he was a very young man but had already revolutionized fingering technique for the cello, was invited here. I mean, not to Second Thought, but to this country. And he was in California, and he went hiking, and he was on the side of a mountain face, essentially. He'd gone way too far, way too fast, and wasn't equipped. And he found himself with his legs akimbo and his arms stretched, knowing that if he moved I beg your pardon, a hand or a foot, that he might, just fall backwards. And as he was having that thought, but knowing that he had to make some sort of a decision, he heard a sound, and he looked up, and a boulder had dislodged, and it was coming directly for his fingering hand. And he said in that moment he had just one thought: thank God I will never have to play the cello again. When I stopped being a dean, I thought I'll never have to do those galas again. This one's important. Yes, community, yeah. Here's the deal. The great thing about live theater is that nobody dies. The great thing about live theater is that you sit in the dark. The great thing about live theater is that you do wind up breathing together, damn it, with people that you don't know or possibly don't even like. And there's nothing you can do about that. And when you put into that space for engagement, for contemplation, for inspiration, for entertainment, something that is intellectually compelling and emotionally involving and theatrically magnetizing, for those 2 hours traffic, those 75 people here, that's a community. Wojewodski, the great theater practitioner, not just because he was Polish, he said that it was a mistake to avoid using the word elite when it came to the theater, but in the following way. A theater audience is elite when you have one lawyer, one shoemaker, somebody from the dry cleaners, the people who mow your lawn, the people who help you out, family you don't particularly enjoy being with, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that those people are self-elected in a way. And the reason they elect to be where they want to be on that particular given night is that they somehow they've come to understand that something is going on in that space that's about them. And they become that audience. And then they leave, and they become ambassadors for what it was that they experienced in that space. It's safe. It's not comfortable, but it's safe. And when that happens, you begin to address these other questions in really significant and direct ways. When I was artistic director at the Rep, I championed, I've always championed writers who were more interested, whose revolution was more in form than in content, although there is that moment in which form is content. And when you begin to censor form, you in fact begin to actually exert a kind of censorship on what can be spoken in the community. But one of the writers that I championed, much, by the way, against the will of the subscriber audience, the good burghers of New Haven and its environs in Connecticut, was a woman named Susan Laurie Parks, who has happily since won any number of awards and recognized thoroughly for her work. But my predecessor, Lloyd Richards, had championed a man named August Wilson. So someone, a colleague, not a colleague, I should say a fellow, an academic. One of the things that I had to do when I first, because that was my first so-called academic appointment, which I think is hilarious. And I was sitting anyway, I'll skip that part. But he buttonholed me and he said, why can't Susan Laurie Parks write plays like August Wilson? She's obviously reflecting the African American experience, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, come with me to the museum. And he said, well, I can't just now. And I said, all right, I'm going to tell you what we would do if you'd been able to join me. I was going to take you into the Yale Gallery, and I was going to put you in front of a Picasso. And I was going to dare you to ask me why Picasso doesn't paint like Goya. That's when I became completely unsentimental about academics, and I came to understand that academics are often the opposite of intellectuals. But when you insist on that material, and then I worked with Ralph Lemon, and he was controversial because he was essentially a postmodern choreographer. And we had people from 7 countries. We had troops of translators on the stage. And the work toured, and it was very, very interesting. But his revolution was in form, so we, of course, paid a price at the box office, which, by the way, I was delighted to pay because I had a brilliant managing director who believed everything I believed about tearing down the management model. She said to me once, oh dear, we're going to need $250,000 more for this production of Ralph's. And I said, what's the problem? She said, oh, no, we could raise it. But it's so much easier to get one $250,000 gift than it is to get 10 $200 or $25,000 gifts, or possibly, you see where I'm going, $100, $2,500 gifts, because of the nature of the material. And then I was rewarded by watching Ralph receive the National Medal of the Arts from the hands of Barack Obama. And so we were vindicated late, but altogether satisfyingly. But what we did in the in those terms, what we did in the meantime was build a much more diversified audience, audiences that had absolutely no trouble with form in that way, audiences to whom we spoke completely directly. And I'm going to say one more thing. I want to tell you a story about my Aunt Maggie. I had forgotten about this. She would like this. She was the funniest person I've ever met. She had a 7th grade education. She worked in a mill for the better part of 50 years. She was also among the most intellectually curious people I've met. My mother called me once and said, hey, your Aunt Maggie and I are coming to see the play. And I said, oh, that'll be great. Come, they would travel a distance. It'll be terrific. And then I put the phone down and I thought, oh man, it was played directly. It's Love's Labour's Lost. Even among people who love Shakespeare, Love's Labour's Lost to be a tough sell, although I think it's gorgeous. And so I thought, well, we'll go to the theater and then we'll go to dinner and everything will be fine. And we went to the theater and then we went to dinner, and my Aunt Maggie asked me any number of the most penetrating questions about Love's Labour's Lost, that could only come out of an extraordinarily well-observed participation in the event. And it troubled me because at first I thought I underestimated her. That was, so I feel slightly guilty. But then I realized why this was possible. It was possible, I have come to believe, because she loved me. And so, because she loved me, and because it was work I had done, she couldn't imagine that there would be any barriers between it and her. And so there weren't. And there's one more thing I want to say in that regard. And it has to do with audience development. Audience development needs to be subsidized in exactly the same way that most other things in the organization need to be subsidized. There's a difference between audience development and marketing. If you're doing marketing, you are not off the hook for audience development. If you have a hammer in your shop and earned income or revenue or whatever that is pays for 75% of the hammer, if you're lucky, usually something more like 40 or 50% of the hammer, then you should also be paying for 40 or 50% of what's going on in audience development, because it can't pay for itself any more than that hammer can be paid for by gross receipts. The goal of of marketing is ticket sales. Ticket sales are a byproduct of audience development. And it takes a long time, and it takes a profound investment, and it takes guts. You guys are lucky. This is what you're facing. Most theaters don't even get this far. There are a lot of theaters in Dallas. There are a lot of theaters in the north of Texas. And I don't think half of them are going to be here in 10 years. If this one's going to be here, you're going to make that decision. The artists that you've compelled, attracted, the staff, guys like Alex and Drew and others, they've made their decision. Now you've got to make yours.
On that note, and I know we have to wrap up, I feel Rob's eyes on me. Stop staring at me.
He just wants to talk.
You were nearly late from London.
He just wants to talk.
I want to say this in crystal ball moment, Stan, because my favorite thing as you are reflecting on everything you've seen over decades and running two organizations, is also just to talk about what is possible, because it always feels a little gloomy when you're worried about raising money or, well, not gloomy.
Listen,
Not gloomy.
if you're committed to the organization, money is the easy part. Money is the easy part. If you truly believe in the mission, if you have a clear statement, this theater has demonstrated that. That's the hard part. If you think that money is the hard part, you have no idea what the artists and the staff have been going through.
So
you have no idea.
So in 15 or 20 years,
Yeah.
where would you love to see Dallas?
I don't believe in futurism. I couldn't pretend to.
Yeah.
I couldn't
Great.
pretend to know. Couldn't pretend to know.
Yeah.
And I think it's a distraction to try to imagine it. Take care tomorrow. Feed the artists tomorrow.
Great.
Feed the staff tonight. Feed them next week. Meet the payroll. That's the future of Dallas.
Yeah. Please, you're already doing it, so join me in thanking Stan for hanging with us tonight. Greatly appreciate it. Rob, I don't know how you're still standing, but here, dude.
One more time, a round of applause for Stan. Thank you so much for having us here and talking with